On this edition of the program, bombshell from the Wall Street Journal on Trump and Epstein. Or is it? Is Hunter Biden the future of the Democratic Party? We've got actual news on the midterms and a big conversation on the state of Texas's redistricting efforts that may touch off a national domino effect. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for Friday, July 25th, 2025. Your old pal Justin Robert Young. One day I'll have one Epstein list day. But I don't think it's going to be anytime soon because the demand for Epstein is insatiable. People love Epstein. Wall Street Journal article. In May, Pam Bondi came in, gave a briefing to Donald Trump about what they were going to do with the Epstein files. According to the Wall Street Journal, unnamed sources, but a four reporter byline, good reporters on there. They say Pam Bondi said, you, Mr. President, you are in the Epstein files, along with hundreds of others. And we can't verify anything that happened in there because this is an investigation. It was obviously not something that they felt that they could bring charges on. They also inform him that they're not going to do anything with it. He says, okay, that's that, moves on. Pam Bondi releases the memo, and, well, we've been here ever since. How big of a story is this? In terms of the information levied, the fact that Pam Bondi told Trump is something that we did not know. So cheers to the Wall Street Journal for that. The fact that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files, I think everybody knew. They were friends from, the 80s and the 90s into the 2000s. We don't know exactly why they stopped becoming friends. Some people think it's because Trump snaked some real estate deal out from under Epstein. The Miami Herald has previously reported because it was that Epstein, while recruiting his young women, wound up going after a member of Mar-a-Lago's daughter, and Trump kicked him out. Obviously, all these things have different context to them, and we have no idea where Donald Trump is mentioned within these Epstein files. No clue. But the fact that he's in them is not a surprise. And so there we go. That's my take on the Wall Street Journal article. If you would like more conversation with me on this subject, then I'm going to direct you to my YouTube channel, Politics. I've got not one, but two international television hits that I did today, or Thursday as I'm recording this. One for Sky News Arabia, shout out Abu Dhabi, and one for GB News, G'day London. Do they say G'day? No. Top of the morning, London. Anyway, both of them are on there. We talk a lot about the Epstein stuff. If you want more of me talking about it, that's where to get it. On this program, we're going to actually talk about things that are going to matter for the midterms. We have a North Carolina matchup. Both of the front runners have announced it would take something big happening in the primaries to unseat it. Whatley versus Cooper. Who's Whatley? I'll tell you, I think it's a pretty good get for the Republicans. Meanwhile, a shakeup in Wisconsin. Tony Evers not running for re-election as governor. That will be a hard-fought race. And then we will follow up with what is our interview topic today, and that is redistricting. Texas says that they are going to create 5 more seats that Republicans would be favored to win in a new I was going to say mid-journey, like the AI picture thing, mid-cycle map. Usually the maps only get redrawn during censuses unless there is a legal challenge to it. Texas is using a legal challenge to redraw theirs. Ron DeSantis says he might do it too. We're going to talk about all that. But before we begin, let me tell you, I just watched 3 hours of Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden on the Channel 5 YouTube channel. Andrew Callahan, somebody who has largely made himself known for doing man on the street interviews in some of the most lively hotspots in the world of politics. He is on the street during protests. He is there amidst the Antifa, amidst the Proud Boys, the Stop the Steal protesters, the anti-vaxxers, the No King's Day people. He's there. That's his MO, and he does a fantastic job of it. For my money, he's kind of the actual spirit of what used to animate Vice. Vice, what used to be this uncompromising, F it, we'll just go there brand. And then it became something extraordinarily progressive and identitarian, which is fine for what it is. It just wasn't what the original Vice was. Andrew Callahan is that. He also delves into some of the weird subcultures of the internet. He's got a tremendous following. And he secured an interview that I thought was remarkable. I can't sit here on this show and talk about reading all the books about the 2024 election. And I have read 5 of them now, and not pretend that I wouldn't like to hear Hunter Biden's opinion of things. And of the 3 hours that he sits down with Callahan, there's probably a solid hour of it where he's just giving me the goods. Angry, uncensored, Hunter Biden blow-torching his enemies. And I was happy to get that. But I'd be lying if I told you that he is not, in his own weird way, a compelling personality. And I'm not alone. Helen Lewis of The Atlantic said, finally a Democrat that could go on Joe Rogan. The kind of guy that would sit down there for 3 hours and answer questions, go on tangents, and essentially just be a dude talking. I took some notes here, and I'd like to go through them. We're going to play a few clips here. There's a lot of them that you might have seen online of him going after the Pod Save America guys. And we're going to get to that in a second, but they're very profane. So, it's a family show. We'll do our best to work one or two in there. First thing I noticed about Hunter Biden, holy moly is this guy online. Hunter Biden is very online. Hunter Biden has logged on. There's no doubt that he has alts. I'm just going to say, there is no doubt in my mind that he has alternate accounts. In fact, I'm now kind of interested to go back and just find the most viral Hunter Biden tweets, not tweets he issued, but ones about him, just so I can cross-reference accounts that seemingly only lived in the replies of those tweets, because he knows everything that is being said about him online. And he knows the people that are saying them by name. You don't do that by osmosis. Man's also got an enemies list. Oh. When I told you that dude pulled out the blowtorch and hit him with the Seth Rollins, burn it down. Here are a few of them in no particular order. Alex Thompson and Jake Tapper, who wrote Original Sin. The Pod Save America guys get it repeatedly. 4 white guys who were junior staffers for Barack Obama who've been dining out on it for 20 years and live in Beverly Hills was the Hunter Biden description. Anita Dunn, who worked with Joe Biden, David Axelrod, Carville, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, Alex Jones, Rudy Giuliani, James Comer, Bukele, Trump, and Chuck Todd, just to name a few. And that's before he starts going down historical rabbit holes. He also has a long and elegant conversation that ties into another Callahan video about pardons and how Joe Biden issued very important, historically significant pardons to people in jail that shouldn't have been in jail. And it was largely Joe Biden apologizing for what happened during his crime bill. Those are the only historic pardons that are discussed during the interview. The most eloquent that Hunter Biden is by far, and I mean this sincerely, is when he discusses sobriety, addiction, and quite frankly, crack. He's got a lot to say about crack. How crack is different than cocaine, how it's demonized, and how it has been used as a cudgel against him, that it is easy to dismiss somebody when you can put crack addict next to their name. And while he is open about his addiction and recovery, he does find that to be an interesting quirk of our culture. And in that, I would agree with him. It is pretty interesting that we have certain lines in the sand when it comes to certain kinds of drugs and not others. That being said, he also goes on to say that alcohol is probably a more damaging drug than even crack is. He does refuse to specifically go into how easy it is to make crack yourself, assumably for fun and profit. Look, this is a 3-hour interview. I would say probably about 15 minutes total are taken out with Callahan's advertisements and plugs for other videos that he's doing. Hunter Biden talks a lot. And let me just say that if this is how much Hunter Biden talks when he's sober, this dude must have been a nightmare on coke. If you have never been around people who have done coke, or maybe you didn't know that they were on coke, there's a very, very, very easy way to understand it. And it's not like you see in the movies where people are talking fast or they're doing backflips or anything like that. At least in my experience, it's not a sensation where you are hyperactive. Rather, you believe that everything you have to say to this person right now, right in front of you, is the most interesting thing in the world. I'm just now realizing that somebody who's decided to do a one mic podcast and talk by himself into a camera, but also to you, the captive audience, probably is somebody that can recognize this phenomenon easier than others. But great googly moogly. If this is Hunter Biden with the horse blinders turned off, I can only imagine what he was like when he was in the throes of his addiction. Here's a quote. There's an evil symbiosis between money and power. You know, one of the few quotes in this interview that makes you wonder, like, are you aware of who you are, Hunter? Are you aware that Part of the lore around you, part of the story of your life as people understand it is that you are a product of a symbiosis between money and power. Hunter is very fixated on money. He is very fixated on counting other people's money. In fact, it often is the first thing by reference that he mentions when he brings up other people. George Soros, well, I'm not a billionaire like him. Jake Tapper, well, he's doing fine, trust me. Even Steve Bannon and Alex Jones, he attacks them for their ideology, but he is always very quick to talk about how much money they're making. One of the pieces of reporting that has consistently come up with the Bidens is that they are particularly fixated on where's the money coming in. I put out on my Twitter a few weeks ago that Joe Biden took a replacement gig as a speaker at a conference a few weeks ago. The going rate for that speaker is, I think, somewhere in the high six figures. Sorry, not the high six figures, the high five figures. Like, not crazy money. It's not like Joe Biden was coaxed to leave his house for $2 million. Biden says the only reason why Twitter took down the Biden laptop information was because of porn. And obviously there were elements of the Hunter Biden laptop that did include things that you could file under loosely the term revenge porn. But that does not explain why both Facebook and Twitter delisted places like the New York Post, which was writing about it just in a news perspective. It is truly interesting how much Hunter will take credit for actions during his addiction, but will not give an inch on political issues. Again, the most compelling parts about this are Hunter discussing his addiction, but he is a political animal. And there is this push and pull, this idea of, hey, when you are in the doldrums, when you're in the valley, when you are in the grip of addiction, you will do anything that you can to keep the addiction going, and that will wreck your life. And he is very open and honest that it wrecked his. You can tell that he has been through whatever program that makes you make amends, but also he's a political animal. And while owning up to your own faults in a 12-step program is a commandment, so is it a commandment on the political side that you've never done anything wrong. And if you have done something a little bit wrong, it's nowhere near as bad as what the guy across the street is doing. And he very much is that. I want to play this clip here. This is at an hour 58, Will. Just this clip about intelligence officers deliberately used certain language when they said that his laptop was Russian disinformation.
So when the laptop story came out as the October surprise, the advice was don't respond to it, because the insanity of what they were saying about, like, Miles Gow was going out there with that guy in New Zealand who took the hard drives in New Zealand and was pressing a story about how I was running sex trafficking rings in China, okay? And they were doing all this stuff. And it was so outrageous. 68 national security people came out and said this has all of the hallmarks of a Russian operation, because it did. They didn't say it was, but it had all the hallmarks of it. And so everybody said, just don't respond, don't respond, don't respond. Well, what I figured out is this, is that it doesn't matter. Once they had a story that involved the son of the President of the United States, drugs, sex, nude pictures, mysterious figures across the globe, all in the mix of the biggest political story in all time.
There's all the hallmarks, which he says very deliberately. Part of the reason why I really wanted to watch every second of this interview was because a Hunter Biden that is talking a lot is a Hunter Biden that is creating a lot of real estate. And that is not a family that is great about thinking 7 steps ahead. They're a pretty hand to mouth type of clan. So there's information in there that you just get first person perspective on that you can either match against statements that were said in the past, or you can hold on to for the future. I thought it was interesting that he was like, well, yeah, I know my laptop. I know that all that stuff was real. But also I will, without a doubt, quote this list of experts. But I just want to point out that they said bear the hallmarks, which it's funny that in the moment I was like, well, that kind of seems like wiggle words. And he's like, yeah, they put in wiggle words. Biden discusses why he was qualified to be on the Burisma board at one point. In fact, well, let's play this clip. This is at 2 hours and 8 minutes.
I mean, at the time that they were writing about my art, Jared Kushner was in Saudi Arabia after being the head of the Middle Eastern Policy Group for the White House and covering for the leader of Saudi Arabia in the murder of Khashoggi, collecting $2.1 billion investment. When he was doing that, and they were selling golden sneakers and Bibles to people off their donor list, the New York Times was still writing stories about the legitimacy of me deciding that I wanted to be a painter or not.
Well, as you mentioned, it's a business. Businesses are profit-driven, and they know that there's a bigger appetite, a larger media market that's going to prefer to hear about Hunter Biden's potential artistic career after the scandal versus a typical, Kushner, Trump family corruption thing possibly happening in a different country. They know that, Trump's audience is going to be more hungry for anything about you than about, it's the classic diversion thing, too. It's like, Don't look at what I'm doing, look at this guy.
One of the things that's interesting is that when we first talked, I said to you, when we had a brief conversation about whether we'd do this or not, and I said, I suspect that many people in your audience, like your kind of, for lack of a better phrase, your loyal listeners, would kind of have probably looked at me over the past 5 years and said, we don't know if Hunter Biden is the villain that they say that he is, but kind of a sleazeball. I recognize that. And the question that I have is that how do you move forward in this world if every discussion you begin is a defense of, I know why I went on the board of a Ukrainian natural gas company. A lot of it had to do with money, 100%. I had an organization that was willing to pay me for a service that I was 100% qualified to do. I went to Yale Law School. I served on dozens of boards before this. I was an expert in corporate governance. I have a encyclopedic knowledge of the region. I had served on a major infrastructure company's board and had done work in global aid relief throughout the entire world and had an enormous list of connections of my own. And I was qualified to be on that board.
Boom, right there. Right there. A list of connections of his own. There was in the 2000s a history of a series of specials by a performer by the name of Darren Brown. Darren Brown is still performing, but the specials that I remember watching the most were the ones that he came out with when he first really hit the scene. And Darren Brown, who was a magician, would distinguish himself by presenting himself as a character that you didn't really know how the tricks were done. Specifically, he would talk a lot about neuro-linguistic programming or the ability for your subconscious to be influenced. And at the beginning of every one of his specials and his television show, he would rattle off like everything that you're about to see in this special is totally understandably created by, and he would list neurolinguistic programming and misdirection, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, he would just be like, and magic tricks. Now, if you knew a little something about the magic industry, which at the time I was covering it, so I did, what you know is that everything he's doing is just a magic trick. It is the same way that David Copperfield does stuff, the same way that Penn and Teller do stuff, the same way that David Blaine does stuff. But he put those 8 things up top to make you think it might be something different. And that's what I immediately came to with Hunter Biden, as he's like, I was on this board and I was on that board and I was this. And also I know a lot of people. It was the last one. That's the reason why you were on the Burisma board. You were on the Burisma board because you grew up in the right schools. You're a rich guy. Your dad's been in DC forever. And so you know everybody that you need to know if people need things to be done. And I don't mean that to say that he was necessarily leaning on his father, although I can't dispute that. What I do know, and this is something that his ex-business partner has said, is that Hunter was extraordinarily good at just knowing the guy to call. It helps in a bureaucracy to know the guy to call. Hunter knew all of them. Callahan compares Hunter Biden to Chet Hanks at what point in this video, and I cannot think of a more apt comparison than Hunter Biden and Chet Hanks. Let's go to 2 hours and 16 minutes here, Will. This is him describing his father.
Who's that guy? Chuck Todd, the guy that got fired from MSNBC or whatever he did. He used to run he used to be like one of the big reporters. Do you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I saw him say, thing about Joe Biden is that it's all a lie. He was a horrible father because who would put their loved ones through that they knew were suffering from addiction through the grueling process? He is it's beyond selfish. There's no one that could do that. It could be good. Like, what the fuck do you know about fucking anything? Mm-hmm. Like, telling me, and by the way, what percentage do I have to say now what I say about my dad? Mm. Other than, he literally is exactly who you think he is, or exactly who he appears to be.
He's exactly who you think he is. From the mouth of babes. From the mouth of babes. Hunter says that his father's awful debate performance was because of Ambien. That is something that, amongst all of the books that I read, I had not heard. I had not heard that there was a controversy about Joe Biden having Ambien at some point affecting that debate. If that was something that was out there, feels like something that could have been said off the record. You were trying to save your political career. Kind of interesting. Hunter says George Clooney's animus toward Joe Biden started when Biden wouldn't back Amal Clooney, George Clooney's wife, in her Benjamin Netanyahu arrest warrant. This is the reason why it is valuable just to put a microphone in front of these folks. There's a lot of crap talk about George Clooney. George Clooney is an overinflated windbag, according to Hunter Biden, that he is really curing the world's ills by being on a play in Broadway. But he also, apparently, and this is more Andrew Callahan than it is Hunter Biden, says that it was George Clooney that broke up Tenacious D. Clooney broke up the band. Now we're back together again. That's interesting. So if for people who are not Tenacious D psychos like me, they were on a tour last year. Jack Black, an ardent Democrat and somebody who has raised money for the party, while Tenacious D, which is Kyle Gass and Jack Black, were on tour in Australia. Donald Trump got shot in the head and survived an assassination attempt. Kyle Gass on stage in Australia made a joke that when praying to the forces of nature, that it was probably Satan. They have a lot of stuff about Satan. Said, hey, don't miss Trump next time. According to Andrew Callahan, George Clooney was adamant that Jack Black had to fire Kyle Gass or he would be cut out of the Democratic power structure. Hunter is very loyal to Papa. In Hunter Biden's world, which is just teeming with Howard Zinn informed graduate student history, Joe Biden is the intersection of intersectionality. He is the common main street that the Black community, the Hispanic community, the trans community, the progressive community can all mix and mingle with each other. And it is at the peril of those communities that they exiled him, or rather allowed the moneyed elite of the party to exile him. Pretty interesting. And then at the end, there's about 10 minutes combined where Andrew Callahan plugging another video about adult baby diaper lovers just talks to Joe Biden about adult baby diaper lovers. Do you know what an adult baby diaper lover is? Well, if you'd like to know more, you can watch the episode yourself, or you can just, prompt it on ChatGPT and, probably do it in a window where it's not going to save to your history. Channel 5, Hunter Biden interview. Don't take my word for it. Watch it yourself. This is your update for TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's the Substack. That's where you support the show. That's where it's time, guys. It is time to join the team. Time to get on board. Time to get 2 Modus episodes each and every week. If you wanted to hear me talk more about Epstein, man, we had more of that. Tom Merritt, the great Tom Merritt, somebody for whom I believe there should be no such thing known as the Podcaster Hall of Fame, where Tom Merritt is not a first ballot entry, in my opinion. He is a mentor to me and he is a friend. And he says that for him, personally, the Sunday show that you get on Sunday night, Monday morning, it could be your first listen on the way in, is must listen. I mean, you can tell Tom Merritt he's wrong. I'm not. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $3 a week. Get it even cheaper if you buy it annually. Michael Whatley, the Republican National Committee chairman, is going to run for the North Carolina Senate seat with former President Trump's backing. The decision comes after Laura Trump, Trump's daughter-in-law, declined to run. The race is going to be highly contested, with Democrats recruiting former Governor Roy Cooper. Okay. So Tom Tillis is the incumbent. Usually the incumbent has an advantage. Roy Cooper is one statewide and Michael Whatley is not. Laura Trump, obviously, look, she's got the name. If you are simply looking at it from that perspective, that somebody will leave their house so they can hit the button for Trump, Michael Whatley is not married into that family, and so he will not have that opportunity. That being said, I've never really bought into the idea that Laura Trump was going to immediately be an amazing candidate. In fact, the fact that she's named Trump would probably invite unfavorable comparisons. On the other hand, Michael Whatley is an a political hand. He, by all accounts, he ran the RNC extraordinarily well. He had the RNC prepared for things that they were not prepared for 4 years earlier. He helped lead the charge when it came to early voting, something that Trump had allowed to be run down. That was a natural advantage for Republicans that they kind of gave up. He also was very, very dialed in on recounts and opening up certain polling places, detail-oriented stuff. That's what that's what impressed me about Michael Whatley at the RNC. He also comes from North Carolina. So that dude knows every vote that he needs to get in North Carolina. Here's the problem. He's always been behind the scenes. He has never been the face. He's done a lot of television, so he is not scared of the limelight, but he has not won anywhere in North Carolina except on the team. Roy Cooper has won statewide in North Carolina as the governor. I would favor this toward Roy Cooper right now, with the understanding that North Carolina always breaks red late. This is the tale as old as time. You got a strong race. It's running even. The Democrats leading, the Democrats leading, the Democrats leading. Oops, all Republican votes. And then that's that. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers has announced that he will not seek re-election in 2026. He is opting to spend more time with his family. The decision opens up a competitive gubernatorial race in a key battleground state. Democrats praised Evers' leadership and vowed to keep the office, while Republicans expressed optimism about reclaiming the governorship. I already saw one election forecasting site move it from lean Democrat to toss-up. Obviously, it depends on who fills that role, who's going to step up and run for Wisconsin governor. Scott Walker making some noise that maybe he wants his old job back. That would be a pretty strong recruit on the Republican side. But we will see. I don't know anything else about Wisconsin politics, except for the fact that it's, Trump won it. It's a swing state. Elon couldn't flip the Supreme Court race. So there's that. I would say of those two, some rare good news for the Republicans. They've had very bad news. They've had incumbents on their side decide to retire. They have had high profile candidates decline to run. Brian Kemp not running. Chris Sununu not running. So on a day where there's not a ton of great news for the White House, good electoral news for the Republicans. And finally, let's get into the topic that we will talk more about with our guest here, DeSantis. That is Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, suggests that Florida should receive an additional congressional seat, citing that the state's population growth and recent reapportionment process screwed them. He argues that Florida was underrepresented compared to other states after the census, and that a mid-cycle reapportionment can and should be in the cards. Now that is the topic that we are going to talk about when it comes to where we are broadcasting here in the great state of Texas and a few other things. Let's go ahead and get to Mary Ellen Klas. Something that you are going to hear a lot about between now and the midterms is the battlefield for which it will be waged on. And that is being determined right now. Yes, a full year and change before anybody votes. There are mid-cycle redistricting, something that will have a lot of ink spilled about it. And here to talk about what is happening in the state that we are broadcasting from, Texas, is Mary Ellen Klas, a columnist for Bloomberg, discussing the big redistricting plans that are ongoing, not but a few minutes away from me. Welcome to the show, Mary Ellen.
Good to be here, Justin. Thank you.
So tell us about this plan. This is highly controversial. It's something that does not normally happen. Give us what is happening and how odd it is in the historical context.
Yes, you said this is unusual, and it is. Normally, redistricting is done every 10 years after the census to kind of rejigger the districts so that every district has the same number of voters. Of course, this is something that is very political because if you know where voters are, voter registration number, what their numbers are, you can make sure that certain districts have certain party registration and advantage certain party and incumbents and so forth. But this is the middle of a decade and the middle of a cycle. And because President Trump is worried that Republicans will lose the majority in the U.S. House this midterm election, and that means his agenda will be doomed and investigations could be launched and so forth. He wants Texas Republicans to flip 5 seats in Texas so that he can offset any anticipated losses that may happen in other states in the midterm elections. So that's what's going on here. And we haven't seen any proposals for maps, but the legislature began, as you mentioned, on Monday. It's a 30-day special session. There's a long list of other agenda items, but the whole question is, how far will Texas Republicans go in doing Trump's bidding with this redistricting change?
How is this possible is really my first question, because this is set to be a once a decade thing. Is that just sort of a gentleman's agreement, a norm for which this has gone that everybody tends to adhere to? I guess my question is, in the incredibly cynical world of politics where everything is trying to claw for every little shred of advantage that you can possibly get, how is this the first time that I can remember this happening?
Well, it doesn't usually happen because incumbents hold such power. Once elected, they often stay in power, right? And they don't like it when their districts are messed with. Now, the reason this is it's not completely unheard of, because there have been years where redistricting maps have been challenged in court for violating voting rights protections or other things. And courts have said, yep, that's a violation. You got to redraw the map. So maps get redrawn mid-cycle in other places. The most recent situation where this happened was in North Carolina. And when they changed the Supreme Court, some newly elected members of the Supreme Court came into office. The Attorney General there appealed to the court and said, our maps don't look right, and let's change them. And so the legislature convened. It wasn't exactly in mid-cycle, but it was closer. It was beyond the. And they redid the maps, and they drew 3 additional Republican seats. And there's a lot of analysts who will say that that is the advantage that Republicans now have in the U.S. House. So what worked in North Carolina, they expect will work in Texas.
So there is, whether or not, it is found to be a fig leaf to justify this or something more substantial, there is some kind of DOJ recommendation that there are incorrect racial allocations of some of the districts here in Texas, right? That is the justification that is being used.
Yes, and I apologize, I didn't expand on that earlier, but Texas's current redistricting maps are under legal challenge for actually violating the Voting Rights Act. But of course, the Trump administration supports these existing maps because they are so, they have 25-12 majority for Republicans in the congressional delegation. So they don't want to see these existing maps thrown out and made weaker for Republicans. But that didn't matter because the Justice Department needed to give, I think, Governor Greg Abbott some cover for calling or adding this to the legislative special session. So they wrote a letter on July 7th that basically said, we think that 4 of your Democratic districts are unconstitutional and they need to be redrawn. And that was the cover that the governor used to suggest that this should be added to the call for the special session.
Gotcha. So this was initially a legal challenge that now has been reshaped by the Department of Justice, which has led us to this point right now where there is going to be a redrawing of the map that theoretically could get up to 5 Republican seats out of Texas.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the legal arguments are at all coherent on this. So, there's whatever.
And probably
happens,
not coherent with the initial challenge, right?
They're not.
Yeah.
No, they're very contradictory. And actually, the state of Texas, in defending its existing maps, has completely contradicted itself by agreeing to the Justice Department's argument in this letter. Now, that's a bunch, that gets into the weeds, but I do think it's important to recognize that there's some legal conflict going on. You're going to be hearing about this. If these maps go through, you're going to see lots of litigation going forward. The odds of it impacting the midterms, though, are the big questions. And these things move slowly, so they could pass some maps that are that in the long run will be deemed unconstitutional, but it won't matter because they can run on them in 2026. In
2026. Okay. So this is the big question. That is the news, right? Mm-hmm. But your column came across my radar because you made an argument that I thought was very interesting. That is my initial idea, is that we have been gerrymandering these maps, especially in one-party states, within an inch of their lives for my entire existence. As I have come aware of anything in politics, the number one thing that gets talked about, especially in states where there's one party in control, is creating these maps as ridiculously as possible to juice their own turnout and make races as safe as possible for not only their state house, but also for the federal House of Representatives. So what really came as a surprise to me was not the desire from a federal level or a state level that they would want to redraw their maps, but just in the year of our Lord 2025, that there are 5 House seats that they could conjure out of a map that they have already drawn so strictly. And your argument was this might be flying too close to the sun, and you might wind up making seats that weren't competitive. Please explain.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not the only one making this argument. The Democrats are as well. One of the things that in Texas history that's happened is they have rejiggered their maps and actually tried to expand the number of Republicans that could win. And it did result in very competitive seats that gave Democrats the advantage. So in the last redistricting cycle, they didn't want to take that risk. So they built, these districts that were more safe for Republicans. And that left open the possibility that there were a lot of Democratic seats that were also safe. Well, the Trump administration looks at the Texas map and says, wait a minute, you could dilute some of these Republican districts by adding Democrats into them, and they'll still be a Republican majority, and they may be more competitive, but we think we're going to win. Well, the problem with that is that this is the midterm elections, and the president's party always loses congressional seats in the midterms. And by taking this gambit in Texas, there is a strong possibility that these seats that get, reconfigured to be less safe for Republicans actually are more safe for Democrats, and that gives Democrats the advantage. So you have people like Hakeem Jeffries saying, they got to be careful for what they wish for, because this could work to our advantage.
This also puts the Texas state Democrats in a bit of a bind because, like you mentioned, some of this might actually wind up being a boon. This might be something that is too aggressive of a move by the Republicans that would give more of an opportunity for Democrats to take a foothold, not only again in the state house and their state representative legislatures, which are going on the same borders, as well as, federally. But the question is now, right up the road, do they make a big stink? They can't stop it. They don't have the numbers to do it. But how much attention do they want to draw to this?
Well, my argument is they need to draw a lot of attention to this. This is a enormous power grab. And, there's a reason that states are allowed to do redistricting and not Congress. And that is because states are supposed to know their communities. They know where there are communities of interest, where people who, if you elect a representative, that representative could go and actually represent your interests. And one part of the state may have a whole different set of interests than another part of the state. So by taking it away and having the White House draw these maps, that is a power grab that is just sheer politics and sheer brass knuckle fighting by the Republicans, by the Trump administration. But the one thing that is, I think, especially troubling here is that Trump really doesn't care about the representatives and whether they represent their districts and whether they can do a good job for the people who have voted them in. He just wants the raw political numbers. And I think that is a really sorry state of affairs. I think that is, we talk about, it sounds very ideological to talk about the decline of democracy, but representation is the essence of democratic institutions. And if they are starting to jigger that and allow the White House to pick the voters as opposed to letting the voters pick their representatives, that's the beginning of the decline. And I think that Democrats have to make a big stink. They do, even though they don't have the numbers, they've got to bring this to the attention of the nation. Because I think what's happening in Texas is essentially the biggest story that nobody's talking about.
Well, the Democrats do not have the numbers in Texas because it is a one-party state for Republicans in terms of any kind of realistic control. They do have the numbers in states like California and Illinois, which have already made noises to say that if this does happen in Texas, then it will happen in California to try to rebalance some of that scale. So there would be redistricting to create more safe seats for Democrats in those democratically controlled state houses. A lot of questions there. I think that we can agree that some of those states have independent bodies that draw the lines that would be challenged. But to your point, can you do something that would survive up until the midterms? Do you think that this sets off a domino effect where we see a lot of activity in state houses for especially in one party states?
I think there is a strong possibility of that. And I think that I really do think that Democrats see this as an existential threat to democracy. And that's why they've really started to accelerate their talk of turning this into redistricting wars. So we've got Governor Gavin Newsom, who's the first one out to basically say that, yes, if Texas moves forward in kowtowing to Trump, he will move forward in trying to get his voters to approve some kind of change that will allow California to re-examine its maps and potentially make it to favor Democrats and offset the losses that could happen in Texas. Now, as you mentioned, there are states that have these independent redistricting commissions, and California is one of them. So voters approved that in 2010. And I don't think Gavin Newsom can go ahead without a change unless he gets voter approval. I think he thinks he can pretty confidently argue that, this is the essence of how you push back against authoritarianism. But it's going to be a long and expensive haul to do that. So it's tough talk on that at that in that arena. Now, the U.S. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has also talked about using this maneuver in states that have fewer Democratic seats to gain, like New York, New Jersey, Minnesota, Washington. They're all controlled by Democrats. And so they're adding those states into this discussion. I don't know how much of that is just talk, but as I said, the odds of getting any of this done before the midterms is pretty long. But
state houses are not historically extraordinarily efficient and speedy bodies. They do not tend to move particularly quickly.
That's right, and I think some of the value of this tough talk. And I think the reason that Democrats in Texas are trying to kind of really, beat their chests and sound like they're going to go to the wall to prevent this is to sort of give Republicans cold feet and maybe persuade them to not push forward with this plan. In some ways, the argument could be made, and I have a feeling it is being. I mean, some of our Bloomberg colleagues have talked to members of the Republican delegation in Congress in Texas, and they are not too happy about this plan. They are worried that the whole thing could backfire.
Well, if the argument is you're going to take seats that right now are held by Democrats and you're going to make them more viable to Republicans by adding in safe Republican voters. And again, just for people, I know this is very, very easy to get into, super in the weeds talk. But essentially what you're looking at is voter registration and demographics, which are the lifeblood of trying to predict out who's going to vote for who. So, for example, my neighborhood in Austin, which is a very liberal area. When I walked around during the end of 2024, the signs in the yards pretty much matched the last voting in my zip code, which was about 85% Democrat and the rest for either Republican or third party. My neighborhood used to be in Chip Roy's district. Now, you might know Chip Roy as being one of the more conservative members of Congress in general, and certainly in the Texas delegation. The reason why was because his district, which stretched way down south into a far more conservative area, had this fairly liberal area because it can subsume that. It can take that on. He can win by 60% instead of 70%, and it really doesn't matter all that much in the end. Now, I since have become, again, a part of Lloyd Doggett's district. I don't know whether or not this kind of plan would have my neighborhood going back to something that stretches further out into the suburbs, but that's really what we're talking about. But at the end of the day, from your point of view, talking to safe Republican seats, they don't like to hear you're going to win by 10% less, especially if they don't feel particularly confident. If you go from I won by 70 to I won by 60, you don't love it, but it's not the worst thing in the world. If you're going to go from I won by 30 to I won by 20, now you start to think about it. 15% is the magic number in politics where something becomes gettable. And so if you're asking for somebody to go from safe to 5 points away from gettable, now all of a sudden people start sweating. And if there's one thing that nobody likes in the House is a tough race, because it means you have to raise more money. It means you have to work a lot harder at it. And it means that you've got to think about your phony baloney job.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the thinking here is that they, as you mentioned, can just shave margins off some of these safe seats. But the other thing that is a reality is that in a presidential election, turnout is so much
very high
than it is in a midterm. So, in addition to shaving the margins, you're also got to bake in the fact that fewer people are going to show up to vote. And who are you going to, which party is going to energize them to show up? Now, I do think Republicans are kind of counting on the fact that there are a lot of new voters that showed up to vote for Trump. There are voters who hadn't voted for before. There were, they were able to get higher margins of Black and Latino voters to vote for Trump, and young men. But can they get them to show up in the midterms? Can they get their attention? Will people be sufficiently dissatisfied with Trump and the inflation numbers, which are unlikely to decline? Their lifestyle. People always kind of look at an election like, what has he done for me?
Yeah.
And I think, those are things that make it rather risky. And I think that's why Republicans are a little anxious about this entire endeavor.
I think that there are two ways to look at it. One is very sunny for the Democrats and one is not. And the sunny side for me is partly what you said, that, look, this is science. It's settled science that when one party controls the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they lose seats in the midterms. You can add on to that part of the reshuffling of the coalitions in this country has meant that what used to be a very Republican cohort, older voters that reliably show up for every single election, now is far more Democratic than it used to be. And it also means that lower propensity voters that used to be very Democratic now tend to be very Republican, which is good for Republicans in presidential terms, but not great in midterms, because midterms are the elections that people tend to skip when you are a low propensity voter.
Very
the
good.
less sunny version. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a very good point. Yeah, the less sunny version for Democrats is.
The less sunny version for Democrats is that right now they don't have a message, and they have swung at every pitch that the Republicans have had, and we don't know where it's going to end up in a year. But right now, the money disadvantage is very real in terms of what Republicans are raising versus what Democrats are raising. That has not been the case. That is an anomaly compared to the last few years, where Democrats have punched way above their weight in terms of fundraising and have usually outraised Republicans, not only on the presidential level, but also in the Senate and House level. But especially in a state like Texas, where, traditionally it's one of the earliest that people, on the national level will say, just cut off the money. We're not going to win these seats down here. That maybe this is the time for the Republicans to strike against the Democrats. They're not fundraising like they have. They are looking for a message. They're looking for a candidate. They're looking for something that isn't that is their own and not just responsive to the other party. And maybe this is the time to kick the opposition party when they're down.
You're right. Those fundraising numbers are pretty grim for Democrats. I also think it's still a little early.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing that you mentioned is their absence of message. But this is where I kind of think that Texas is giving them a gift. Because, if you are a voter and Democrats can successfully make the argument that they do not care about your vote, they are just going to stuff you into a district where you have no voice. And they're going to make sure that we're going to go from, 12 members in our caucus to 7 in, this gigantic state where your congressional demographics or your congressional delegation don't match the demographics. If you can just say they don't care about your vote, they're taking it away, and turn that into a spectacle. You can't be arguing that this is all about saving democracy. Those messages we learned in 2020 and 2024 do not work. But, I think that there's got to be some way that they can message this. And that's where the next 30 days are going to be really interesting. I mean, if Democrats cannot figure out a way to get some internet attention to what they're doing and what's happening in this power grab, I think you may be right. People may just shrug their shoulders and say, it doesn't matter,
Well, I will say federally, this is the kind of stuff that juices fundraising numbers. You are able to raise money from places that may not be Texas, but may be very, very interested in the midterms, obviously, that are going to fundraise on stuff like this. In terms of making the Republicans pay for an over-aggressive map, the one thing that I wonder, and this might be the time that we're going to find it out in the midterms, but because there doesn't seem to be any central power structure in the Democratic Party right now that would be enforcing a hard doctrinal sort of message, is that maybe it does leave room open for some of these candidates to run a little bit more like a center of the road Texan and not somebody that would raise a tremendous amount of money from California and New York, which is where I think Texas Democrats have tended to fall off. Is like, look, you're going to be able to go to Dallas Metro and Austin and Houston, and you're going to be greeted like a hero in those liberal areas. But you got to win on the margins. You got to win on the border towns. You got to win in the suburbs. And that's where a candidate that doesn't hew more to the baseline is going to fail. And that has been part of, I don't think just in Texas, but certainly you're based in Florida. I know Florida well, having grown up there. You have to meet voters where they are. And right. It's not going to be this pretty universal picture that you just mint one candidate out around the country. You gotta have flexibility. And that's one thing that I think for the Democrats' own survival, they need to learn going forward, especially when they're looking at these House seats, which might be harder to come by than they would have been otherwise.
Yeah. And I think the other intriguing thing that's happening in Texas is watching how the Democratic Party is, there's a lot of Democratic candidates that are eyeing that U.S. Senate race.
Yeah.
And I think that's really going to be interesting to watch. I mean, you've got some establishment people, you've got newcomers like Talaferro and, and you've got Beto O'Rourke making the rounds these days. It's fascinating because
third time's the charm.
I know these guys all want to argue that they're representing working class voters and make those issues matter. And I don't think that's a argument that should be taken lightly. I think if they can really hit those nerves and turn people out and show that they care, it is a bit of more of a middle of the road message than the one we're hearing from the MAGA side. So, but it's going to be interesting to watch and whether or not they can even push through. And then you've got the Republican side in your state, which is a fascinating dynamic.
Oh my God. I mean, like right now, yeah, if we can talk about that Senate seat, because I do think that the turnout that's going to be driven from that Senate seat is really going to be a huge part of this. You have the Republican side where John Cornyn might retire. Otherwise he might lose against Ken Paxton, who is somebody that is highly controversial, very, very popular with MAGA, but also not only went through a corruption scandal that he barely survived when Republicans in his own state house, again, the same state house that is now going to redraw these maps, went after Ken Paxton where he barely survived. But then only 2 weeks ago, his wife divorced him on biblical grounds. Not me saying that. That is in the legal document that she filed. That's why, of course, adultery was part of the scandal that he barely survived. And so we don't know whether or not there's going to be more coming in on the Republican side, whether Wesley Hunt's going to run. But the Democratic side, just as interesting. You have Colin Allred that's already announced. He ran against Ted Cruz. Ran better than Kamala, but it was not any Democrats' year in 2024, as we all found out. You have Beto. And then you have somebody like Jasmine Crockett, who would probably raise the most amount of money because she is probably nationally at the highest wattage of star power. But I don't know whether or not she plays throughout the rest of the state in the same kind of way. So it's definitely, I've been denied so many of my favorite races so far in this midterms. Kemp deciding not to run in Georgia was just a super bummer for me, who just wants to be able to watch really competitive races. But this one might fit the bill because it's going to be crazy. The primaries might be extraordinarily expensive on both sides.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I'm really fascinated by the Texas race, U.S. Senate race. I'm also curious, do you think, I mean, I saw where Cornyn was so determined to, he would maybe step aside if somebody else would come in to challenge Paxton because he's, you know, he's pledged he's not going to let Paxton win. That to me is such a fascinating dynamic. And what do you think? Do you think that he will step aside and will Wesley Hunt jump in, and will that be enough for Cornyn? What do you think?
The question really becomes whither the big man, Trump, where's that endorsement going to go? Or really the win would be for Cornyn, the Cornyn side, right? Which also, before we get into this election, John Cornyn was somebody who worked for the past 2 decades to be the Senate Majority Leader. Like there was the whole thing it was the 3 Johns that were running against each other to succeed Mitch McConnell. John Thune gets it. And now Cornyn might be on the ranch in a couple months. But the rumor is that he'd be willing to step aside if somebody else did it. I don't think that anybody would get in that race in a substantial way to run against Ken Paxton, who is very loyal to Trump, who was next to Trump during every dark period. He is a guy who very much values loyalty, as we have understood. But he also knows Ken Paxton is probably the diciest role when it comes to a strong Democrat, if the Democrats can put somebody up that's particularly strong.
Yeah.
If Wesley Hunt gets in, he has certainly he's popular enough on MAGA. He's on television a lot, more charismatic on television than Ken Paxton. That also speaks a lot to Trump. My guess, if I were to guess, my guess is that Wesley Hunt gets in. It's a double Truth Social endorsement, and you start to see some of the poll numbers for Wesley Hunt go up and up, because I think he would also be the Fox News pick. They would make sure to juice him in terms of screen time, and he's good on camera, which is something that would help him.
And if Cornyn endorses him, then Thune gets behind him.
Yes,
and their money.
Nobody would be getting into that. Like the tricky thing, and for Wesley Hunt is like, all right, if I get in, am I getting in with a Trump minimum co-endorsement, right? Or do I think that I have a pathway to there? And do I have full Senate leadership backing? Like, do I inherit everything that you would put in to John Cornyn? That would be the bargain. And you've seen him make a few moves, subtle, sneak disses. Like when all the stuff was happening with Ken Paxton's personal life, Wesley Hunt was putting up pictures of his family on his Instagram. So a little bit there. But if it was Wesley Hunt and he had all the money behind him, I think it would be a far safer seat. It would be, I don't know if it would be Cornyn safe, because incumbency is a hell of a drug. But I think Wesley Hunt is somebody that probably from that lane is fit enough politically to kind of step up to the big leagues and run statewide. But, we'll see. Who do you think comes out of the Democratic side?
I don't have a good enough sense of that at this point. I'm intrigued. I think there's, Florida's got a governor's race too, and Democrats are just scrambling. And it's just so nobody knows what message, and Democrats are so insecure. They never find a message and stick with it. They kind of just shift back and forth from one to another.
Especially the Florida Democrats. Mary Ellen, we have a bit on this show once a year where we draft the worst state parties, and the Florida Democrats are perennial top, always a first draft pick, whoever's there. The fact that they can't find somebody from one of their bases of power, from the I-4 corridor from where I'm from, Broward County, like that they can't find anybody to just run a compelling, normal race that's not Charlie Crist, that's not an ex, that's not goofy like Nikki Fried. Just run. There's not one businessman. There's not one dude with a boat that you can see grilling.
Let's talk about the female mayors that are complete powerhouses in Florida. I mean, I think, and they're getting the work done. They're not flashy. They're not, but they are, and they're moderates. But they do not want to try it. They just don't see a pathway forward because Florida's just a mess. So
I don't believe, and I know we have to get you out of here, but I'll leave on this. I don't believe that the Democrats are taking seriously enough the fact that you can't give up on Florida. If you give up on Florida, if you look at where the demographics are going, like by the next census, they might like be in real demographic trouble. They got to understand how to play in Florida and how to play in Ohio, or this is going to get dark like quick for them. And I don't think that I see the urgency of like, hey, if we're crafting a message, what plays in Columbus? What plays in Fort Lauderdale? What plays in Orlando? Because they need that going forward. Like they can't just give up on this.
Yeah. There are a lot of Democrats that do acknowledge that. And this is a favorite theme of mine, is looking at the next census, because, because of the way redistricting is going right now, if they don't look at this seriously, by 2030 or 2032, there may be a permanent majority of Republicans in the U.S. House, and there's no going back because all the growth is in these southern states, right? So they're going to get the additional numbers, and you don't have to manipulate them the way Trump is at that point. I agree with you completely that this is the serious project. I know people are thinking about it and talking about it. We'll see if they can produce it.
Because it was one of the things that was crazy to me watching in 2024, that you heard both the Biden campaign and the Harris campaign just talk about like, well, like the blue wall. I'm like, that's it. That's your last line of defense. Like you are not treating this like something where you can have multiple pathways to win because you have a candidate that can play in these states. Like that's dire, and it's only going to get more pronounced. Like you mentioned,
those blue walls are going to lose seats to the red states. Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be the same thing as happened 10 years ago. All right. Mary Ellen Klas, thank you so much for joining us. A tremendous conversation. Where can people find more of your work?
I'm at Bloomberg.net and Opinion. Look for me there. Thank you.
There we go.
It was my pleasure.
And great pieces about the situation here in Texas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Take care. Thanks.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics, written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. You can send me an email, theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Find, follow, and share video clips of the show. TikTok is Justin R. Young. Instagram is Justin R. Young. But the YouTube is where you need to be. Like and subscribe, fellow kids. Politics is where you go for that. Hello, YouTube. Breaking the fourth wall. You can support us with a one-time donation. PayPal.me, pay jury. Where you go for that. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Cash App is PX3 Cash. And you can send me anything you like in the mail. Post Office Box 153-184, Austin, Texas 78715. Again, that is Post Office Box 153184, Austin, Texas 78715. But the only place that you get 2 bonus episodes of the show is TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $12 a month. That's $3 a week. That's that's just a regular cup of coffee. I'm not even talking about anything with any fancy squirts. 2 pumps? No. Straight Black Joe, dude. $3. If you'd buy me one of those, you can get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. But it is only in our foundational tier that we read your name. Head on over there right now so you can hear your name amongst this class of legends. Sonny Black, L3PO, Peepaw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Sarah Jeannie, Jeremy, Pro Idiot, Chiller Tomatoes. Oh yeah, it's Adam, Neil, AB Puppy, Dr. Whiskey, Michael, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Will, The Borge B, Matthew, Matt, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Andrew, Phil, Edison, T-Vaughn, Paul, a dog named Checkers, Gloria, my mom, Jerry, Trucker, John, Berkeley, Steven, and Zombie Doc. You want your name read on the show? One place to do it. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. We got a great initial crop of guests. Might not be all of them, but an initial crop. We are going to bring my friend Jennings on the show because I got obsessed with 1990s FEMA conspiracies. I was listening to an episode of The Political Orphanage. Somebody was talking about how in the One Big Beautiful Bill, ICE is funded to a point where it could become the personal Gestapo of the president. I'm like, where does that sound familiar? 1990s FEMA conspiracies. So we're going to have a 1990s FEMA conspiracy chat, me and Jennings. And we are joined by somebody for whom I have really, really enjoyed his work on the Two-Way platform, Dan Turrentine, who has worked in Democratic politics. He is on a bunch of different shows on that network, but the one that resonates the most to me is The Morning Meeting with Mark Halperin, Sean Spicer, and Dan Turrentine. And so we're gonna have a good conversation about the state of the Democratic Party. I like that he does not pull punches. He is willing. He talks in the way that I hear Democratic operatives talk when they're not being recorded. But he's doing it recorded, which is something that I like. And that's on the show next week. Until then, I hope you have a great weekend. A reminder that some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss. Three.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show audio.